The drowned boy returned to the same place and pleaded with me to listen to his final word. They call me Earl McKenna, a name as weathered as the hull of my boat, and I've owned it for just as long. Most folks around this little spit of land just call me Earl. When you spent more than 50 years wrestling a living from the Atlantic, you earn the right to drop the formality. My face is a road map of those years, creases carved by sun and salt, eyes that have seen the ocean in every one of its tempers, from a placid mirror reflecting the dawn to a black, churning rage that would swallow the moon itself. My hands are gnarled things, more like driftwood than flesh, but they still know the feel of a good line and the heft of full net. This isn't just a job for me. It's the only language I've ever truly spoken, a long, rambling conversation with the tide. My boat, the sea rack, she's not a little tired, a lot of patches, but she's honest. We understand each other. I know the groan her timbers make just before a swell hits, and she knows the weight of my footsteps on her deck when I'm weary. We go out before the sun has the courage to show its face, chasing the silver glint of mackerel or the stubborn promise of cod. Life out here is a rhythm. The chug of the old diesel engine, the cry of the gulls, the slap of water against the bow. It's a lonely tune. It's mine. Back on shore, my cottage is quiet, smells of old wood, brine, and coffee. It's enough. A man my age learns to find company silent, to see the stories written in the grain of his own table. Now this coast is full of places with names given to them by generations of fishermen. There's Gull Point, the Devil's Teeth, and the channel we call the Back Alley. But there's one place, a nasty little hook of a cove just a mile or so north of the harbor, that has a name spoken in lower tone. We call it the Drowner's Cradle. It looks peaceful enough on a calm day, with the water turning a pretty shade of jade as it laps against the dark, jagged rocks. But any man with a lick of sense knows that beauty is a liar. The currents there are treacherous, unpredictable things. They coil and twist beneath the surface like snakes in a basket, an invisible web that can pull a boat onto the rocks or a swimmer under before they can even draw a breath. Scream. Most of us give it a wide berth. It's bad luck, a place that seems to hold a hunger for the careless. We say the sea has a long memory, and the cradle is where it keeps its saddest souvenirs. It was in that very spot, a decade ago now, that the town lost a piece of a boy named Lucas. He couldn't have been more than 10, a bright kid, full of life, with a shock of sandy hair and a grin that charmed the clams right out of their shells. He was the only child of Mary, sweet woman who worked over at the diner. That day was clear and warm, the kind of summer afternoon that feels like it will last forever. Lucas was down on the small patch of sand at the mouth of the cradle, hunting for shells. He was. His mother was watching from the bluff above. She turned away for just a moment, a single moment, to call to a friend. When she turned back, he was gone. There was no splash, no cry for help, just an empty shore and the gentle, mocking sound of the surf. They searched for days. The Coast Guard, every fisherman with a working engine, folks walking the shoreline until their feet were raw. They found nothing. The Drowner's Cradle had rocked another soul to its final sleep and had kept him. The tragedy left a wound in this town that never quite healed over. It became a quiet, aching thing, a ghost that walked alongside us whenever the fog rolled in thick from the water. That particular afternoon 10 years later started like any other. The air was heavy and still, the water like hammered gray steel. The kind of day where the silence feels loud. I was working a line not too far from the cradle, far enough to be safe, but close enough that I could see the dark teeth its rock. I wasn't thinking about Lucas, not consciously anyway. My mind was on the pull of the tide, the price of fish, the mending I needed to do on just the simple arithmetic of a fisherman's day, and then I felt it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the sea breeze, a deep, Profound melancholy settled over me, as thick and damp as the coming fog. It was a sadness that didn't feel like my own. I shook my head, blaming it on my age. An old man's mind wanders, starts dredging up things from the bottom. I was about to reel in my line and head for home. I heard it. It was faint, almost lost in the whisper of the waves against the hull. A sound crying, not a loud wail, but a soft, heartbroken sob carried on the wind. I froze, my hand tight on the reel. I scanned the shoreline, the rocks of the Cradle. Nothing, just the gulls circling, their calls sharp and lonely. It had to be a bird, I reasoned. Strange echo. The sea is full of tricks, plays with sound and light like a stage magician. I tried to dismiss it, to force the practical part of my brain to take over, but the feeling of being watched was immense. It was a weight on the back of my neck, a prickling of the skin that told me I was not alone. I squinted into the gloom that was beginning to gather around the mouth of the cove, and for a split second I saw a shape. Down by the water's edge, the foam rushed in, small, indistinct, no more than a flicker. The edge of it was there, and then it was gone, absorbed into the grayness of the rock and the... I blinked, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It was nothing, a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a passing cloud, the mind of an old man, lonely and tired, filling in the blanks with ghosts. But the explanation felt hollow. A lie was telling my comfort. I've been on this water my whole life. I know its sounds, its moods, illusions. This was different. This felt real. I pulled my anchor and started the engine. Another steady chug of the diesel to comfort. A familiar voice, the unnerving quiet. All the way back to the harbor, I didn't look back at the Cradle. Didn't need to. I could feel its gaze following a cold and patient eye in the mist. Back in the safety of my little cabin that night, with the wind whistling a low tune outside my window, I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was listening. The image of that fleeting shape, the echo of that sorrowful cry, played over and over in my mind. The ocean had kept its secrets decades, and I had the sinking, terrifying feeling that it had finally decided to tell one of them. A man can't live on the water for 50 years without learning to trust his a different kind of compass, one that doesn't point north, but points toward trouble or fortune. And in the days that followed that strange evening, my gut was spinning like a broken needle in a magnetic storm. The cry I'd heard, the shape I'd seen, it was a fish hook in my mind, and the more I tried to shake it loose, the deeper it set. Sleep offered little escape. I'd dream of dark water, small pale hand reaching from just beneath the... I'd wake up, taste salt, and the sound of a child's sob still ringing in my ear. The sea was calling me back to the Cradle, and it wasn't a request. It was a demand. So I went. I told myself it was to prove my own foolishness, to sit out there in the plain light of day and see nothing but rock and water, to chase the ghost out of my head with a dose of reality. I motored the sea rack out to the edge of the cove 3 times in that week. I'd cut the engine and just drift, letting the tide pull me in a slow, lazy circle. I'd scan every inch of the shoreline, every shadow between the rocks. I saw nothing. I heard nothing but the gulls and the surf, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was a constant pressure, a heavy blanket of sorrow that seemed to emanate from the water itself. It was as if the place was steeped in grief, and I was soaking it up like an old sponge. Any other man would have called it quits, chalked it up to an old man's fancies. Stayed clear. Couldn't. I felt a pull, a strange sense of obligation that I couldn't name. The night it for real, the fog came in. It wasn't a gentle mist. It was a wall of white, rolling in off the cold depths, swallowing the world whole. It was so thick you could barely see the bow of your own boat. Sounds became deadened, distorted. The world shrank to a tiny circle of gray water around my hull. It was foolish to be out, dangerous even, but I hadn't been able to stop myself. The urge had been too strong. I was anchored just outside the cradle, the fog so dense it felt like I was in a room with no walls. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water and the mournful bellow of the distant foghorn, a lonely giant crying out a white emptiness. Then the world went silent. The water stopped lapping. The foghorn seemed to die. Stillness fell that was so complete, so unnatural. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. The air grew cold, a damp, penetrating chill that went right through my coat and into my bones. And there he was. He wasn't on the shore this time. He was standing on the water, just a few yards from my boat. Or maybe not standing, but part of the water coalescing out of the mist, the sea itself. It was Lucas. I knew it instantly. The sandy hair, the boyish frame, though everything about him was translucent, shimmering like a heat haze on a summer road. He was wrapped in the gray of the fog, his form shifting and uncertain, but his eyes were perfectly clear. They were filled with a sadness so deep it could have drowned the world, and a desperation that pierced right through me. He wasn't frightening. That was the strangest part. A lifetime of sea yarns about vengeful spirits and ghouls of the deep, and here was a ghost, and all I felt profound aching pity. He opened his mouth, and a sound came out, but it was like hearing a voice from the bottom of a well, tangled with the rush of water and the whisper of wind. It was a struggle for him, a monumental effort to push his words out of his world and into mine. He did not. The words were fractured, broken by a sound like a wave crashing. "Help me!" I leaned forward, my knuckles white on the railing, straining to hear over the phantom surf in my ears. My own voice was dry croak. Who didn't help you, son?" His image flickered, weakening. The urgency in his eyes grew. "The locket," he whispered, the word nearly lost. "The silver locket." He raised a shimmering hand and pointed, not at me, but back toward the shore, toward the town. Tell her." His voice was fading fast, dissolving back into the elements that had formed him. "Please." And then he was gone. The fog pressed in. The normal sounds of the sea rushed back to fill the void. The lapping water, the distant, steady moan of the foghorn. The unnatural chill vanished, leaving me clammy with sweat despite the cold. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't being haunted. I was being asked for help. The boy hadn't crossed over because a piece of his story was left tangled in this world, snagged on a secret like fishing line on a rock. And for some reason, he had chosen me to pull it free. The question was, what did it all mean? A locket, someone who didn't help, a plea to tell her, Mary, it had to be Mary. It was a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The next morning, I tied up the sea rack and walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I needed someone with a memory as long and cluttered as my own. I found Ephraim down on the docks, his back bent over a tangled pile of net, his fingers working with a slow, practiced patience. Ephraim's been here even longer than I have. They say he was born with salt in his blood. "Earl," he grunted, not looking up, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I pulled up a crate and sat. "Maybe I have, Ephraim. Maybe I let the silence sit between us for a moment before I spoke again. My mind's been dredging up old things, thinking about that boy Lucas. Ephraim's hand stilled. He looked up, his pale blue eyes squinting at me from under a mess of white eyebrows. That was a bad business, a shadow that never lifted. "I was trying to remember that day," I said, choosing my words carefully. All the chaos, the search parties, anyone new in town around that time, anyone who was down by the cradle. Ephraim frowned, his gaze turning inward, searching the dusty archives of his memory. Folks came and went. Summer tourists mostly, but there was one fellow, stayed a few weeks, name of Vance, a smooth talker, had a way about him, bought a lot of drinks down at the tavern. He paused, a flicker of recollection in his eyes. Come to think of it, he was the one who raised the alarm. Said he was walking the bluffs, saw the boy get swept in, claimed he scrambled down the rocks, tried to reach him, but the current was too fast. A real hero he made himself out to be. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A hero, I repeated softly. What happened to him? Left town a day or two later? Ephraim shrugged, picking up his net again. Said the memory was too painful. Can't say I blamed him. Most folks forgot all about him after a week. Just another stranger passing through. But I would forget him. Vance, a name to put to the faceless he from the boy's desperate whisper. He didn't help me. The words echoed in my mind, no longer a phantom's plea, but an accusation. The story everyone had accepted for 10 years, a tragic accident, a failed rescue, suddenly felt thin, like a worn-out sailcloth about to tear. My curiosity had hardened into something heavier, something with the cold, unyielding weight of responsibility. I had a message to deliver, and now I had a place to begin. The drowner's cradle hadn't just taken a boy, it had swallowed truth, and it had an old fisherman to bring it back to the light. The name Vance hung in the air like the smell of low tide, something foul hiding just beneath the surface. A hero who left town the moment the applause died down. It didn't sit right. Old fishermen learned to spot a lie the way they spot a change in the weather. There's a shift in the atmosphere, a wrongness that you can't see, but you can feel deep in your bones. The boy's words weren't just a ghostly whisper anymore. Compass needle, and they were pointing me toward Mary. But the other piece of the puzzle, the silver locket, kept snagging my thoughts. It felt important, the key to unlocking the rest of it. I had to see Mary. The thought filled me with a heavy dread. For 10 years, she'd been living in a house of grief, the curtains drawn, moving through town like shadow of her former self. Ripping open that old wound felt like a cruel thing to do. But Lucas had pleaded with me. Tell her, he'd said. It wasn't my story to keep. It was his. I found her tending the small, neglected garden behind her cottage, her back to me. She moved slowly, her shoulders stooped, with a weight no one could see. Mary, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and for a moment her eyes were vacant, looking right through me. Then recognition flickered. Earl. Her voice was thin, rusty from disuse. I'm sorry to bother you, I began, my words feeling clumsy and big. I was thinking about Lucas. A shudder came down over her face, the familiar mask of pain she wore to face the world. People don't talk about him much anymore, she said, her voice flat. I know, but something's been nagging at me. A memory, maybe? It's probably nothing, but I keep thinking about a locket, a silver locket. The change was immediate and startling. The mask crumbled, and her eyes filled with a raw, sudden grief. 10 years fresh. Her hand went to her own throat, a gesture of pure instinct. His locket, she whispered, her voice breaking. How did you know about his locket? I just remembered him having one, I lied, the truth being too fantastic, too cruel to explain. It was mine, tears now tracing through the dust on her cheeks. My mother gave it to me. It had a seagull etched on the front. Lucas loved it. That morning, the morning he went to the shore, he found a perfect little cowrie shell, smooth as a pearl. He said he wanted to keep it safe for me. He begged me to let him wear the locket to put the shell in. I told him not to, that it was delicate, but he had a smile that could melt a glacier. She choked back a sob. They never found it. I always imagined it was still with him down there in the cold, a final piece of me he took with him. My heart ached for her, but Lucas's words burned in my mind. The locket key. He didn't help me. Vance had been there. The locket was lost. The two facts felt connected, twisted together in the dark currents of that day. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that the locket wasn't at the bottom of the ocean. It was in the cradle. The next day, the tide charts predicted the lowest tide of the year, the kind that happens when the moon is a sliver and seems to pull all the water out. It was my only chance. The drowner's cradle would be exposed, its secrets laid bare for a few short hours. As I motored the sea rack out, the water was unnaturally calm. The rocks of the cove, usually submerged slick with dark green algae, were exposed, looking like the decaying ribs of some massive sea creature. I anchored and rowed my small dinghy onto the patch of wet sand, the same sand where Lucas had taken his last. The air was thick with a palpable sense of waiting. I felt his presence all around me, not as a vision, but as a guiding pressure, a gentle nudge on my soul. "Where, son?" I whispered into the quiet. "Where is it?" My gaze was drawn to a section of the rock face that was a mess of deep crevices and fissures, usually well below the waterline. It was a treacherous place, slick with sea slime and sharp with barnacles. Guided by nothing more than that invisible pull, I started to search, my old hands probing the dark, watery cracks. I worked for nearly an hour, the incoming tide a ticking clock at my back. I was about to give up, to believe I really was just a crazy old man chasing shadows, when my fingers brushed against something cold and small, wedged deep in a narrow. I worked it free, my heart hammering. It was the locket, tarnished almost black by a decade of salt water, but it was unmistakable. Small silver locket. The chain was broken. With trembling fingers, I worked at the clasp. It was stiff with corrosion, but finally it gave way with a faint click. I expected to see a small, perfect cowrie shell, but that's not what was inside. Tucked into one half of the locket, tiny, tightly folded piece of oilskin. In the other half, nestled beside it, was a small, intricately carved ivory button, the kind you'd see on the cuff of a fancy gentleman's coat. My hand shook as I unfolded the oilskin. Inside was a small, flat key. Not a house key, but a luggage key, the kind used for an expensive traveling. It all crashed down on me at once. The hero Vance, a stranger in town with a smooth story, the boy playing in a secluded cove. Vance wasn't there to admire the view. He was there for a rendezvous transaction. He was hiding something or waiting for something in that cove. And little Lucas, in his innocent search for shells, must have stumbled upon him. The boy saw something he shouldn't have. Maybe Vance dropped the button in a struggle. Maybe Lucas snatched the key. The locket was the perfect hiding place for a small key. Lucas wasn't just swept away by a rogue wave. Vance watched him go under. He didn't help me. He let the ocean do his dirty work, silencing the only witness. I rowed back to my boat, cold weight of the locket heavy in my palm and heavier on my soul. I gave the locket to the sheriff, along with the story, the real one, leaving out the ghostly part. I just said I'd had a hunch and decided to look during the low tide. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he couldn't ignore the evidence. A few inquiries later, they discovered that a man matching Vance's description was a known smuggler specializing in rare artifacts. The button was traced to a coat he famously wore. The truth, buried for 10 years, had finally surfaced. That evening, I did the most important thing. I took the locket to Mary. I didn't tell her about Vance or the smuggling. She'd hear that soon enough. I just handed it to her. "I found it, Mary," I said. "It was wedged in the rocks." She took it, her hands cupping it as if it were a living thing. She clicked it open and saw the empty space the shell was supposed to be. A single tear fell onto the tarnished silver. But for the first time in a decade, a flicker of something other than pain crossed her face. It was closure. A final piece of her son had come home. The deepest truths are often hidden in the quietest places, and sometimes it takes listening to the whisper to bring just the present. The ocean holds its secret, but it will eventually entrust them to those who respect its depth. Thank you for listening to an old fisherman's tale. The sea is full of stories, and I've got a net full of them. If you want to hear more, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You'll be the first to know when the tide brings in a new one.